Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants, but not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm associate editor at Fine Gardening Magazine. And today I'm joined by Mark Weathington, who is the director of the J.C. Raulston Arboretum at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
So I've been starting these interviews with the same question for everyone, which is, could you please tell us a little bit about your earliest memories of plants and gardening? And were you a kid that liked plants, or did this horticulture obsession come later in life?
So, it's funny. I always envy those people who talk about gardening as a child, at their grandmother's knee. That is not me. Although I do have a memory of my great grandmother in New Orleans having this just wild kind of what seemed a jungle garden in the back of her house, and I do remember eating figs there. But really, no, I never thought about plants growing up, other than mowing the grass. I went to college to be an architect and decided not to be an architect. I was going to go into business and got into the business school and went in my first day for business class for principles of accounting. And I sat down and, whole classroom people, and the professor gave this whole 20-minute spiel, the syllabus and what we were going to learn. And he ended up by saying, if there's anybody who thinks they shouldn't be here, now's the time to leave. And I stood up and threw my backpack over my shoulder and expected there to be this mass exodus, because who on earth would want to stay there for that? And then I had to kind of slink my way out, and actually had a girlfriend who was in horticulture. And so I took a plant propagation class. I'm not even sure if I knew exactly what propagation was. And by the second or third class, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm just super lucky that I came across it. Now, at that point, I had tried every major at Virginia Tech. So it was down to that or, East Asian religion, I think. But I absolutely loved it from the beginning.
So, and your bio on the NC State University website says that your undergrad degrees were both in sociology and horticulture. So can you tell us a little bit about your sociology studies, and were there things that you learned from that you find helpful in your work in horticulture?
For sure. Now I tell people, I've told people when I've interviewed that I did that on purpose because I'm in public horticulture. The truth is, there was a professor who taught the sociology of the military, juvenile delinquency, sociology of death, and there were all these fascinating classes. And by the time I figured out horticulture and figured out all the classes I need to take and when I was going to be able to graduate, I was like, well, I can get a sociology degree while I'm at it because I've taken all these other classes. But it has it's wound up helping me a lot, because it's there's a lot of looking at surveying and polls and talking to people to think about how groups of people think. And so it's really helped me with kind of parsing information that I receive. You get so much information, and so often you react in a public space to you hear four people tell you this thing. You're like, oh, we've got this crisis going on. I've got four visitors telling me this thing. And then you step back and say, okay, well, we've had 100,000 visitors through here. Maybe this isn't a big deal. Are we solving a problem that doesn't exist? And it's helped me in management and those kinds of things as well. And I speak all the time, I do a lot of public speaking. And so it's helped me not as a speaker so much as trying to figure out who my audience is and being most effective communicating with them, not dumbing down or changing, but how do I want to present information?
That's cool. Maybe we should have all studied sociology because it does sound useful.
It
You,
is.
yeah, you went on to get a master's degree in horticulture, also from Virginia Tech. Can you tell us a little bit about your postgrad work and what the topic of your thesis was?
So I kind of did my master's in two parts. I found out a week before I started my graduate studies that I was going to be a father, which was very exciting, but it was a little stressful. So I started off with and what I finished with, but in slightly different manner, was looking at water efficiency in use in trees in pot and pot systems. So in ground where you grow containers in set in the ground. Um, Unfortunately, I was working with trees, which meant I was using 25-gallon containers of a quick growing tree versus a slower growing tree, and to manage water use efficiency over time meant that we would water the plants. I would weigh them, and then with spray sticks, different setup of spray sticks in there. I would weigh them, and then put them back and weigh them again an hour later and an hour later, and do this with replicated trials. And of course, the scale had to be very precise, so it had to be set up in one location and not moved. So I spent a lot of time moving 25-gallon trees up and down rows, and by the time I'd finished, it'd be time to start the next one, because it'd be the next hour. You start the first one again, and I don't have fond memories of that. That I have not used since doing that work.
I bet you had no need for a gym membership that year at all.
Yes, yes. So after that, after that first year of doing that, I left and went into public horticulture. I went to Atlanta Botanic Garden and worked there for a few years. And my boss said, we were sitting down, and she said, "Is this what you want to do, public horticulture?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Go finish your master's. That's what you need to do." So I went back and finished it, doing the same work, only I sized it down to 3-gallon shrubs, because I had learned a lesson with that.
Very smart. And then after you completed your graduate work, did you went back to another public garden, or did you go back to Atlanta?
No, I went to Norfolk Botanic Garden, which is southeastern Virginia, Virginia Beach area, Norfolk. It's called Hampton Roads or Tidewater region, and it's an amazing garden. And what they're doing now is phenomenal. When I got there, it was kind of a sleepy little place, but large-ish, 150 acres. You can tour it by tram or boat. It's kind of on the middle of a lake with canals going through it, and really got thrown to the wolves there as supervising horticulturist and then director of horticulture, and but had, as I've had everywhere, amazing people that I worked with. That's the beauty of public horticulture. I love working in botanic gardens. I love public horticulture because everybody there could be somewhere else, probably making more money. So everybody really wants to be there and really works together and has a shared goal. And so it's just always this amazing place to be with people. And was there for about a decade, and I had been looking for a couple of years. It was time for me to move on. And here at J.C. Raulston Arboretum, it was my dream job. I mean, literally, I had told my wife it was my dream job years earlier. And I interviewed a lot of places and turned a lot of jobs down. And finally, the assistant director job here at J.C. Raulston opened up, which was literally, I'd said, that is the job I want, a decade before I ever got it.
That's so cool. Dreams really do come true,
They
right?
do. They do.
That's great. One of your most fascinating aspects of your work at the Arboretum, at least from the outside perspective, might not be true for you, but the travel that you do to collect and preserve and distribute plants. I read that you've gone to China, Taiwan, Japan, Ecuador, Europe, Mexico, New Zealand, Vietnam, Uruguay, probably more than that even. how do these trips benefit American gardens and also the ecosystems where you're collecting the plants from?
Sure. Well, that's a big question. But I will say, I'll start with saying part of the reason for it is as we're part of NC State University, so as a land grant institution, we have an extension mission, and our goal, our mission from the beginning has been to diversify the plant palette. We think diversity is the key to greening our cities, to supporting wildlife. We think it's more important to be diverse than to have a limited palette of, say, all plants native to one region. We think the diversity is the most important thing. So our goal is always to bring in plants, trial them, evaluate them, and if they're good plants, get them in the hands of nurserymen and other gardens and individuals, plant breeders. So part of that entails going and finding plants in the wild. And people think it's always new plants, but it's not. It's often finding the northernmost limit of a subtropical plant or the southernmost limit of something that doesn't like our heat and humidity, and going to places other people are ignoring when they're looking for landscape plants for kind of the mid part of the country, not the zone 5 north, kind of where a lot of the breeding and introduction has been done historically, but kind of the middle parts of and southern parts of the country. So yeah, it's amazing going there. It's amazing because there's always great new plants to see. It's amazing because you get to see plants that you've known and grown forever growing in the wild, and you get to work with amazing people. We always work with local folks, maybe at botanic gardens, maybe from universities, maybe from whatever country's Academy of Sciences. Sometimes it's in conjunction with those people and local nurserymen, botanists. And so there's a whole big thing about benefit sharing. If I'm going and collecting plants here, there should be some benefit shared. And people look at that like, you're collecting a plant, you're going to introduce it and sell it, some money from that should go back. That's not how these things work. It takes decades between a plant being collected. And so we do, when we go down and we're working with somebody from a university, say in Uruguay, they want to do field research. That can be expensive. So we pay all the expenses for the whole trip, including, often multiple researchers to come with us. They get to do their field work, which is important for them, without having to get grants or beg money from their universities or organizations. So that benefits them. And then we really like to bring some of their folks up to visit us, either to go collecting in the wild here or to, we have a very advanced nursery industry here that a lot of countries don't have. And so we do, a lot of times we'll work with how to grow plants where they're growing them. And having visited them, we know kind of what their resources are. We're working with a group in Vietnam. They are a governmental group, but they're doing their endangered native plant conservation and restoration. And when we went to their brand new big facility with a new nursery, boy, they were growing plants terribly. It was sad. And they had said they had talked with somebody else at another university from the US, and that person said, oh, what you need to do is you need to grow these plants in pine bark, put in, this lime in here and sand. And pine bark's not available where they are. That's not a product. So we looked around and said, all right, what's here? I see little, almost like cement mixers, but making bricks in front of people's houses. Like they're making their own bricks there to build houses. Well, crushed brick in an area where they get that much rain and have that much water is a great medium for growing plants, as long as you can get some fertilizer to them and things like that. So we brought them here, showed them what we do, but then, we had prepared some stuff and we're showing them how they could do it in crushed brick or a material that they had, rather than tell them the way we would, what's in an extension publication that won't work for them. So having been there, we could adapt what we do to what they can use.
That is so cool. That's great and so useful for them. Um, So next question, you and Tony Avent co-wrote a chapter for a textbook on the topic of botanical gardens and their role in conservation, in plant conservation. And the editors and publishers were a little bit hesitant to let you write about conserving rare and endangered plants through propagation and dissemination, but they ultimately allowed you to do it. Can you explain why this idea is controversial in the world of plant conservation?
Yeah, for whatever reason in plant conservation, there tends to be a feeling that endangered plants need to be kept where they are, and we need to protect them in the wild where they are, what's called in situ, which is great, except for many of these plants are endangered because they are under threat from habitat loss, they're under threat from climate change, there's all these human influenced issues to them. So putting a fence around them and keeping them safe in situ, while that would be ideal, is often not a way you can save the plant. If we have really, if we're changing the environment, it's going to be unsuitable for the plant. That's not very good. So what a lot of these conservation organizations do is say, okay, we will collect the plant, and us at botanic gardens or conservation programs, we get to grow the plant. But we don't want to give it to you, because if we give it to you, I don't know, you won't treat it right. In some cases, they're afraid that you'll muck up the genetics. I've heard that term several times. It's a rare lily. If you grow it, you might grow another lily. And then if you grow seed from this rare lily, it might be a hybrid. Well, that's fine. You can grow the pure thing in isolation at your botanic garden, but there's no reason not to get it to you. And hey, if that thing makes a great hybrid out of your garden, fantastic. That's something that we can sell. We believe plants are there for us to use. So and there are some great examples where there's a cactus in Argentina that was found. It's in a very restricted location, very few plants. And cactus and succulent people are rabid collectors. And they will travel long distances to go see a plant in the wild, collect a plant in the wild. Now, you don't want to do that with something like that. It takes a long time for them to reproduce. But I'm not sure what agency it was in Argentina. I guess the natural resources or some sort said, okay, we've got this rare and endangered plant. Let's collect seed, give it to the British Succulent Society, the British Cactus Society, Europeans, American Cactus and Succulent Societies. All these folks grew out that plant. It is relatively easy to find in those circles of folks. No, the plants in the wild are fine now. Nobody's going to get those plants because they're available. Genetics maybe will get mucked up, maybe they'll cross with something, but people aren't going and trying to collect it in the wild now because we gave them access. So, that's just one type of example for that. And if the plant gets killed off in the wild, it has been safeguarded in multiple places. So we really think that while we may be the experts in some instances, really there are so many individuals and organizations that we should partner with in order to conserve plants.
Yes.
And we get to make more.
Yeah.
We can make more plants. And if I want to know how to propagate something, if I stick cuttings, if I try grafting, if I try growing from seed and I have no luck, I don't go to other botanic gardens to figure out how to do it. I go to nurserymen because that's how they make their living. That's how they put their kids through college and pay their mortgage, is by producing plants. So I go to them because they are the true experts. I don't, keep them out of any of the process. We partner with them, and I think that's the key. And we've got a lot of black and white in this conservation, in everything, right? And the world is gray, and it's very easy to speak in black or white terms, but nuance is the key. We're all about native plant conservation. We just look at it in a different way than a lot of other places do.
And I think if the plants had a vote, they would pick your way rather than being trapped in a botanic garden or have a fence around them in their home country.
Right. And
Great.
the truth is, if you want to conserve genetics, having a tree in a botanic garden does very little. And really, when you're talking about population genetics, having 10 or 20 trees, it's, you, in often cases you have to have hundreds, and that's just not feasible in a single botanic garden.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, let's talk about some of your amazing travels of
Okay,
all
okay.
of all of your plant exploration trips. Do you have a favorite or one that stands out in your memory as just being especially good?
So my very first foreign collecting trip was Taiwan, and Taiwan is amazing. The flora there is amazing. It goes from tropical down at the ocean up into really alpine in the center. It's got one of the highest mountain passes in Southeast Asia in Taiwan. It goes above the tree line. So it was so rich and so diverse, and was at least vaguely familiar because it's I'm familiar with that Chinese Asian flora, um, and wow, it was amazing. So that, it was the first trip, and it was really a successful trip, and so that stands out. But for the scenery, I couldn't beat New Zealand, and I spent 3 weeks alone doing this in New Zealand, pretty much, which was amazing. But when you get down to it, the people we worked with, I mean, we were in Vietnam up high on a mountain, camping in a little shed with tarps as a roof, and our the folks who were helping us, both from the government and our porters, were there. Everybody's laughing and joking. We're cooking a meal right out there on a fire, eating it together. All of us, from different areas. Some of us could communicate with each other. Some of us couldn't. And it's hard to beat memories like that with amazing people. Uruguay was really neat. That sticks out because it was my most recent one. This past spring, and that was I had that was a place where I didn't know the flora very well, so it was really fascinating to see what did grow there.
Um, let's talk about that. What do you find in Uruguay, and what's I mean, I don't think a lot of people know very much about Uruguay. So what is the climate like? And yeah, like
So
help us picture
yeah,
Uruguay.
so Uruguay was off my radar until I really started thinking. There's a few plants that we grow. One that I really am very interested in as a ornamental edible, and that's pineapple guava, which is a beautiful evergreen shrub, has really great fruit, but it doesn't produce fruit really well for us. And so I said, well, what we need to do is find ones that start flowering earlier, shorter ripening season, good quality fruit, and are cold hardy. So we need to start finding some of these. And so Uruguay, I was looking at the area where Uruguay, Paraguay, and southern Brazil all meet, because that's kind of a real interesting spot. So Uruguay that kind of explains where it is, right up the south of Brazil. It's about the size of Washington State. It looks tiny on a map, but that's because Brazil looks so big. So the state of Washington's not small for a country, beyond ours and China and Russia. Um, and and I wasn't really sure what to expect. Because of how I think in Southeast Asia, I was like, elevation, I got to get up in the mountains. Well, there aren't really mountains in Uruguay. There's some flat topped hills, but 400 meters is 1,200 feet is about as high as you get. Um, but you get this influence off of kind of coming off the mountains, the Andes and highlands of Argentina. You get coming down in Paraguay, coming down into Uruguay. That's cool air, kind of on the south and west side, and then actually some fairly cool air coming down from the northeast from southern Brazil, which is much cooler than people think of Brazil. And it was real hit and miss. We'd go somewhere and I'd say, okay, there are eryngiums growing, rattlesnake master, globe thistle, whatever you want to call them. And there are dozens and dozens of them growing there. They fill every ecological niche there. Bog plants, dry cliffs, meadows, wherever. And most of them we can grow just fine. And then right next to it will be something that I think of as completely tropical. And then there'll be something that I don't know if we can grow, but it's the same genus as things we grow from the US and from Mexico. There's a snowbell, a styrax, that is widespread in Uruguay. It was on my, I hope I see this plant. I just hope, and it was everywhere, but I didn't know there was a styrax there. There's a buttonbush, Cephalanthus, our native buttonbush that grows down there. It looks very similar to our native buttonbush. So there's all these things that are similar to what we know, but then also a lot that are very different, and a lot that I'm sure are tropical or subtropical plants. And they were growing side by side. And I can only figure that has to do with the way plants move. They often keep their hardiness when they come down, migrate down from the mountains naturally, or after ice ages and they've been shifted to a different location, they retain that hardiness. So it'll be really interesting. Now, it's very poor in terms of diversity with woody plants. There's only about 130 different native species of woody plants. But the herbaceous diversity is amazing. Growing with two salvias that we grow here, Salvia guaranitica, or cerulean now, which is the tall blue sage. You may know it as black and blue or rhythm and blues, I think there's one. And the bog sage, Salvia lignosa, which is a garden fug here. It just spreads. There was another, growing right with both of those, there was another sage that looks like a strawberry begonia or something. It's ground covering, vining, little round leaves low to the ground with blue flowers, Salvia procurrens. I'd never heard of this sage. I've grown these other two that are growing right with it. Why hasn't somebody collected this other one? So it was neat in that way, seeing completely new plants as well as, things I had some familiarity with.
Yeah, it pays to go off the beaten path. So I read about the expedition to southern China, which was described in the spring 2018 Friends of the J.C. Raulston Arboretum newsletter. And we will drop a link in the show notes for those that are interested in reading this. But this sounded like a more fruitless and frustrating journey than most, especially the first part of the trip. Despite having secured all the proper permissions in advance, you were turned away at the last moment for a nature preserve where you want to collect from by police. Can you tell us a little bit more about that journey?
Sure. This was one with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. We had our people there, and we went to this spot. It's southern China, farther south than a lot of times people go, on the south side of the Nanling Mountains in Fujian. Well, Fujian is, the mountains go up there kind of between the southern part and get to the central parts of China. So it's a high elevation, and it just happens to be across from Taiwan. So there are a lot of military installations in that area. And so we wanted to be there. We got a bunch of the permissions to get there. We had all the documents signed and dotted, and our folks with Chinese Academy of Sciences had it. And we drove to this hotel in the reserve. Got there late at night, and the next morning we got up and we were walking around. And before we actually even got in the woods, there was a little planted small arboretum with signs. So this is great. We're going and looking at what we're going to see in the wild. And we were there, and all of a sudden we noticed a couple people kind of hanging around and watching us, which is not unusual in China. And finally they approached our colleague from China who was with us, and they got into a back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and papers came out, and ultimately said, our Rich said, we're going to have to go. They won't let us stay. And so basically that was all the highlands area that we wanted. We could go south and out of the reserve, but there it was really subtropical and wasn't useful for us to collect. So yeah, it was one of the most frustrating things, and sometimes I go back and look at pictures of places that I've been or want to go, and I'm like, oh, there were such neat plants here. I really want to go back. Things that would be good for us to grow. But it wouldn't have been so bad, except for the next place we went. We had gone up north to Xi'an, and we're going to through Shaanxi and Gansu, and in Shaanxi we stopped, went to a hotel, walked through and actually inspected it. Our Chinese person was afraid the hotel wouldn't be up to our standards, which I've stayed in some real sketchy places. And it was all great. And then we went to check in, and they said, "Oh, we don't take foreigners." So we went to another hotel. We checked in, went to our rooms, went out to dinner, came back at like 9 o'clock in the evening, and they caught us as we were walking across the lobby and said, "Oh, we don't take foreigners. You got to check out." So we left and found a pretty sketchy place that would take foreigners. But in China, they keep track of you. Some hotels can take foreigners, and they have to report you to the government when you're there.
That's kind of weird. I am still slightly haunted by the photo of the giant salamanders that you and your colleagues narrowly avoid having to eat out of politeness. Are there, because it's not breakfast food, right?
Right. Yeah, those big giant hellbenders.
Yeah. Do you have any other alarming culinary offerings that have been,
So
put before you in your travels?
I'm pretty okay with eating most things. Yeah, I've learned, a lot of our issues with foreign foods as Westerners is texture, and I've learned when the texture is weird to not try and just swallow it down, but to like think about the texture and embrace it. But I will say the two things that I can do without again. One was chicken sashimi, so thin sliced raw chicken breast. Um, that I don't need to eat again. That was in Japan. Um, and then in South Korea, down at the very southern tip, uh, where most of what we ate was seafood, and I was served we were with I was given a talk there, so I was with a professor and then a bunch of students, and they ordered this little bowl and said, "This is a specialty here, very, very special." It's a little bowl, and there's all these little pink things in it. And then he touches it hits it with his chopsticks, and they all start moving a little bit. And he's like, "It's a real delicacy." And I said, "Oh, okay." And so I go to eat one, and you're always at risk of eating something and then everybody really laughing because they got you to eat something. So I eat it, and what it was some kind of mollusk from the bay there, but it was like chewing on a tongue. They say the tongue is like one of your strongest muscles in the body. It was like that. It kind of fought with you, and it was tough, and it moved and didn't have much flavor. Um, he ate another one. He ate one. I ate another one to be polite. And then I noticed all these students did not eat this delicacy at all. But I can't remember what he called it at first, but he said what the locals call it. He said a word in Korean, but what it translates to is puppy penis, because that's what they look like.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That doesn't make it better.
And it actually didn't taste that bad. It just, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Ugh, no, pass. Oh. I've noticed that you collect plants a lot in Southeast Asia, and I'm wondering what it is about Southeast Asia that makes it so great for plant collecting.
Yeah, they call China the mother of gardens. It's just so rich. It has a climate very similar to ours, and that's true whether you're living in the north, especially the eastern half of the United States. Whether you're living in the north or living in the south, that you can find areas that are very, very similar in climate, but then much more diverse. So where we may have 10 oak species, they'll have 40. We have two Eracema species, they've got 50, 100. I don't know. So it's always this real incredible diversity of plants. And part of that is, I just like explaining to people why that is. It isn't just that they're more diverse than us. It's that the mountain ranges there go east to west. So you have a couple of mountain ranges that go east to west. And on the west side, you have the Himalayas. So you have this cold air that comes down from the Himalayas. So, and then the Gobi Desert north and Mongolia. So you get very dry, cold air across the top. You get fairly dry, relatively cold across the center, at least for the western half of the country. And then in the south, you get the monsoons come up from the ocean and kind of go along those, go west to east with the winds along the southern side of the mountains. I've literally been on those southern mountains between some of the provinces. You go to the top of the mountain and look over, and it is a fairly relatively dry landscape, whereas on the north side, the south side is this lush, warm temperate to subtropic forest and it's this really stark difference in a lot of places. So you have so much opportunity for diversity because of the way that the winds move and moisture. And then the mountains are very young geologically. So because they've been thrust up relatively recently, things have speciated quite a bit. So you get a different thing on this mountaintop than this mountaintop, pretty much like islands. Whereas here, in the east, especially, we have these old Appalachian mountains, and they've worn down, and so plants have been able to kind of reconnect and kind of stabilized into what maybe one or two or species, as opposed to all these different things that are relatively young species.
Oh, that's fascinating. It sounds like a lot of mountain climbing is involved in.
Where we go, well, one, mountains haven't been cut down nearly as much. You get a much more of the flora than you do in other areas. Same here in the U.S. But also where I find the flora most fascinating for us is right at that line between subtropical and warm temperate, because so many of those subtropical things will actually grow for us that we think of as tropical plants. And then you get, where you're getting, say, the bananas and things like that are, and ginger lilies are meeting oaks and hornbeams and stewardias, and right at that intersection is just fascinatingly diverse. And a lot of times we'll collect something and have no idea. It could be either completely hardy to zone 6, 5 maybe, or it'll die in our first winter here in zone 8A, 7B.
And you send it out to people who are in sort of a range of areas so that you can get a sense of that?
Yeah, we really spread it out. We try to get a lot of plants out to other botanic gardens and institutions because they're interested in this, and they will keep track of our accessions and collection numbers so that we know which plants are there. But we also send it to nurserymen and to breeders who are working, in special plants. And then our members get just these amazing wild collected plants and really unusual things because that's part of what we do. Last year we distributed something like 16,000 plants to various people and institutions and things.
That is so cool. I am sure that your members love you and love your trips. I coincidentally on my social media feed, Hayes Jackson, who's down in Alabama, I think, he was showing off like this really cool banana and he said it was from you, and I was like, wow, that's a coincidence. But yeah.
We folks like Hayes, who's also with Extension. In Alabama, we're often trading plants back and forth and sending things down, and sending plants down south. We like to hit some of those gardens there that with some of these things that we're unsure about. We don't have the room to grow. You collect seed's small. You get to collect hydrangea seed. One head of hydrangea seed is thousands of plants potentially. we can't grow them all here. We're small, so we grow them out and then we send them to as many places as we can, so that we can, and hopefully they report back with, hey, I got a really good one, because our goal is really to move plants into the nursery industry, and that isn't always, it isn't always just the wild plant. Often it really needs to be a selected form, one that's more cold hardy, has red new growth, has pink flowers instead of white, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like by having the enthusiasts growing it in their gardens, like they're just the chances seem to increase of finding that one genetic sport, or that, yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to be the magic one.
And I often tell people, like, when you think about how this works, the Encore azaleas, one of the most popular plants throughout the southern U.S. over the last several decades, that started with seed that was sent to California in the 60s. And the first introduction from Alabama, out of Alabama, was in 1991. So when people talk about benefit sharing or those kinds, it's a long, tortuous path before you get something that comes to market.
Yeah, but I feel like what you do with helping the technical side of the people in the home country, that seems like sharing too.
Well, it is, and that's we think, kind of the teach a person to fish rather than give them a fish. If they're trying to conserve plants, say like we do in Vietnam, if they can't grow the plants effectively, they're never going to be able to repopulate the mountains. And also, helping out a lot of times with the how to do things. They had planted out a kind of a plantation of a species that they wanted to grow up and bring back. And, sometimes it's hard to tell people this, but we said, do you know where these were all collected? Well, they're all collected from one place. And they're like, well, really it would be best to collect from different places, keep track of these seedlings came from this place, these seedlings came from this place, these seedlings came from this place. You'll have a more a useful repopulation kind of set than if you just have kind of just the species. It's also the location. Yeah. And so that's what their next step is. Now they've got a good start on this one population, but they can do the same thing with these other populations as well.
Cool. I had a question about planning these trips. Like, how many trips do you have in your mind at once, or in various stages of planning, and how long does it take to plan a plant collecting trip?
Yeah, there is so many places I want to go. I really like to see the whole world and wish I could see it all, but I do confine myself to areas where we can probably grow things. I'd really like to go to China again. It's been a long time, but the political situation has made that a little trickier. They're close. It's my understanding is it's been a little bit difficult for some folks who've gone there recently. Looking at going to Japan again, it's been a long time, and tend to think of Japan as having been pretty fully botanized. But on a recent this spring, a plant buying trip there, we found some areas that seem pretty untouched and had some plants that I know are not in cultivation anyway in the U.S. So looking at going there, and it so happens that a couple of other colleagues are looking at that as well. I haven't gone much past that in terms of places to go. I want to go to northeast India, Arunachal Pradesh, but the planning of the trips is that's the real stopper for me. Is it takes so much time unless you have somebody who's really kind of doing the details for you. When I've gone to Taiwan, I've really kind of made my schedule myself, and then worked backwards with working with folks from the Taiwan Forestry Research Institute and Taipei University Botanic Garden. But say if I were to go to Paraguay, I would have to really find somebody there that knew the flora, because I could go in and I wouldn't have any idea where to go, where I could collect, where to get the permits to collect, all of those kinds of things. So I'd first have to find somebody to help me with that. In Uruguay, it so happened that somebody in the Oak Society that I'm with is a great plantsman and really helped out with all of that and made the introductions and helped chauffeur us around and things like that, because he was from Uruguay, and we were communicating about Asian oaks, and I realized he was from Uruguay, and I said, hey, I've been interested in going there. But it can take, just days and days worth of work, figuring out, where you're going to stay. When I go to China, usually we'll have one main contact, either at a university or the Academy of Sciences or Botanic Garden, and we'll tell them kind of the area we want to go, and they'll make the arrangements from there. And from that point on, we're kind of, at their mercy. They take us to places, and it can get slow because, it's good for them to have a lunch or a dinner with the local mayor or, whoever. And so you have this big meal that cuts into your time, but, it's important. It's good for them to be doing so do it happily, or at least grumble quietly to ourselves in our hotel room. But,
Right. Let someone else take care of the diplomacy part of it. Yeah. That makes total sense.
It's gotten the part bringing things back has gotten easier for me over the years. But whenever I always tell people, there are a lot of rules and regulations and things like that. You got to have permits before you go. You have to have permits in country. You have to have inspections in the country. You have to have inspections here in the U.S. before the plants get here. There are a ton of things that are not allowed. There are actually some things that ended up on the list that I didn't realize when I went to this Japan plant buying trip. And so there are things that I spent money on where when I'm having it shipped back, I realize I'm looking at the updated list and saying, oh, no, and handing plants off to the person who over there who helped us and said, here's a present, because I can't bring this into the U.S. It is for a lot of reasons, fines. You'll never be able to get on a pre-check global entry again if you bring something in. There can be $50,000 fines. Lot of issues. Plus, you could bring something in you shouldn't. If you stick something in your suitcase, if you do, seed or plants or things like that and try and bring it in, you just don't do that. And there are plants that are allowed in that I can bring in that I look at and I say, too much chance of this being a pest. I wouldn't bring it in. Yeah. And I should say we do this in the U.S. as well. We do work with native plants as well.
Yeah, that is important to remember that it's not just these far-flung plants that you're working with at the Arboretum. You're also working with the native plants and finding things, just a few miles away that are just as exciting and important as things you're finding on a mountaintop in Asia.
Yeah. We were just out this winter, late winter, looking at the Hamamelis ovalis that was recently described down from Alabama, but trying to map its extent through Louisiana and into Texas and trying to find what its entire range was. And while that's part of, with a collaborative group, that's part of their ultimate goal. Part of our ultimate goal really is to look at them and look at, while they're in flower, are there ones with larger flowers, different color flowers, which there are, and start thinking about, okay, we're going to need to get some cuttings of these particular ones to introduce to the nursery industry, because it's what you get if you buy this plant, if you can find it, is all over the place and usually a seedling with very small flowers. And we want to support the green industry by getting plants that they could sell alongside sunburst and Gelina and those kinds of things.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate the work that you are doing for the green industry as a whole and selfishly for gardeners as well. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love anybody who's trying to get out great information about plants like y'all do.